Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Moby Dick Book Club. And we are covering chapters 41 through 44 today. And as always, if you're interested in joining into the conversation, we've got a Discord server here, and you're welcome to join that. You can find the links to join in the live chat there, or if you prefer, you can just continue to comment or watch asynchronously. You've got multiple options for multiple levels of participation. Now, starting off with chapter 41, that one's called Moby Dick. And this is where Ishmael, after kind of the wildness of the last chapter, gets to stop and give us another one of his atemporal summaries of things, things that he must have figured out talking with lots of people and is presented to us in no particular order. First thing he says is that he, when you had the Ahab pledging the rest of the crew to himself and to his mission, he admits quite freely that he had been caught up with the exact same motion in all of that, that he wasn't, somehow cool and aloof from all of that. He was just as much caught up into that. And then he tries to tell you all that anybody knows about Moby Dick. He's an unusually deadly sperm whale. So in addition to his unique appearance, the wrinkled face, the white skin, the large triangular hump on its back, tends to really be able to kill sailors much more consistently than any other, even any other sperm whale, which I suppose, given that those are predators, but they actually have teeth on their jaws. They're not like a baleen whale. They're probably a little more aggressive than a baleen whale, that eats krill would be. Spends a lot of time talking about how rumors among sailors work, which, I think we could have picked up on context, but apparently it was important that we need to know that. Especially how it's like hard to track a single whale down, and there's all sorts of legends popping up about Moby Dick being able to move outrageously quickly or being immortal. But what does seem to be pretty consistent with Moby Dick is that he is unusually aggressive and is able to make use of like a false retreat, putting people into a false sense of confidence, then turn around and really smash the little rowboats that are going after him to pieces. And then, Ahab sees Moby Dick as responsible not only for his lost leg, but for the obsession and the spiritual malady that's fallen upon him. And Ishmael's goes through length to talk about how Ahab is only hiding his madness. His madness is sort of using his reason and his ability to cooperate as a mask to get what it wants done. So a reminder that you're not really sure what you're up to. And the crew, as it's constituted, has almost been constituted such that there won't be anybody who can counterbalance it. That Ahab is, it's almost like he handpicked it, so this would be a crew that he would be able to dominate. So, this is another exciting chapter.
Yeah, I think what stood out for me was the interesting sort of exemplification of how lag works in the world. Right. And so you're trying to put together an information network, and this actually comes up multiple times, right? You're trying to put together some data about where the whale is. But the bottom line is you don't see other sailors for 12 months at a stretch in many cases, right? Because you're between ports for 12 months, and, so it's very hard to track the whale. And there's various methods and, but where is this whale and how does this work? And are the reports accurate? And all of that comes up. So it's sort of a nice treaty against the idea that we can have perfect or even accurate knowledge of this world. and I think that's actually super important designation. Like, oh, it's very clear the constraints of the whaling community mean that you can't have this information. You can't really put it together. And when you try, you get all kinds of problems. Like, oh, it turns out that the whale was in two different places at the same time, and it's the same whale. So even if you do the trick, it doesn't work. It ultimately doesn't work. And yeah, there's a lot of this high contrast. One of the things I like about the book is very high contrast uh, explanation around there are dangerous whales, but then there's the sperm whale, and then there's Moby Dick. It's like this, and the idea too that you mentioned, Father, was very good around this possession of the spirit, right? That then manipulates the rational mind. That another super important theme. You don't know what you're up to, and you don't even know what's driving what you're up to. It's even more, for me, even more fascinating. And those are some of the, and also so this is the formal character and stuff, right? Of the antagonist of the book. Like, finally, we get to be formally introduced in a way, but then we really don't know anything at all at the same time, which is another high contrast sort of literary trick, I think, that being foisted upon us here.
So,
Okay.
well, I wanted to have the other side of the coin, because there's also talk about identity, identifying. Uh, they start talking about wild rumors and whether there's an adequate reality for them to cling to, right? So there's two sides. There's the reality and the observation and the verification and all of these things, and then there's the projection upon whatever happens, and those are separate worlds, and they can be united or they can be separate in like disconnected, I mean. And and then you live in the fantasy, and like obviously some of those sightings weren't real, right? Like some of those sightings were real. It's like how do you make the discernment, right? And then at a certain point they're talking about Moby Dick revealing his identity at a long distance to those who knew him, right? So there's a qualifier to the observant, whether they are capable of actually observing the identity of the whale, right? Um, and I think it's important to realize that there's this participatory element, right? Like you have to be introduced in order to know someone. Else, like, what are you seeing? What you can't even see, uh, what you're looking at. Um,
Well, he mentions that explicitly, the participatory aspect of the knowledge of the whale. I
right.
forget where it is, but it's in one of the sentences. It's very explicit, which I thought was interesting.
And then it even escalates at some sense. Ahab had cherished a wild vindictiveness against the whale, all the more fell for that in his frantic morbidness at the last came to identify with him, right? So this is identify against, actually, right? Not with, but whatever. Like, not all his bodily woes, but his intellectual and spiritual exasperations. So, so what's happening is the framing of reality, right? Not only like his relationship, but like it extends to all reality, right? So literally, Moby Dick is deified, right? Like he's the one who dictates how the world reveals itself to Ahab.
And I think that's really interesting based on some of the things that Ahab said earlier, um, specifically the inscrutableness of Moby Dick, right? So what's something that's inscrutable? It's something that you can't cross-examine. Somebody that you can't, just ask them straightforwardly what their intentions are and why they're doing it. And one of our previous chapters, when they were making the oath, that's what he said to Ahab said to Starbuck was like, well, it's the very inscrutableness of Moby Dick. That's why I hate him so much. There's something that I can't comprehend about him, and that's what's driving me here. Um, so again, this image that we're getting, specifically kind of through the eyes of Ahab, is this great inscrutable force that smashes anything that tries to assault it and take it up on board the ship. So yeah, put a pin in that. It's going to come up later.
That force is also pre-existing, right? Because it causes Ahab to jump at him. So there's an erotic aspect to that will, to Ahab, that's pre-existing his binding, right? Like, because he's literally become part of the will. Like his leg has been consumed.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah.
I think the level of hatred that he has for it as well, that he says here, he piled upon the whale's white hump the sum of all the general rage and help and hate felt by his whole race from Adam down. It was just it's like, how long has this whale actually been around? And he's just like, everything that ever happened is that whale's fault, And I wanted to add with the whole thing of like, oh, there's this kind of spirit that is kind of compromising the reason of the people. Like right at the beginning of the chapter, you kind of see Ishmael's perspective of it, that he says, that as he was being kind of called to the oath, that all the more stronger he shouted and more did he hammer and clench his oath because of the dread in his soul. So he wasn't actually like enthusiastic in a positive way, in the same way that a lot of like the harpooneers seem to be. But he was like just fearfully getting even more energetic the entire time. And then as we kind of get later into the chapter, you see Ahab's thing where it's saying like his madness seems to even have its own intelligence, like completely separate from him.
Yeah. There was this one particular passage where it spoke about Ahab's soul, and it spoke about this ancient, like an ancient temple deep inside of him with ancient sculptures in there, and it's like this was Herman Melville describing for us the function of the unconscious part of the human being, habits, passions, memories, some kind of belief that's probably inarticulate and unarticulable, all that goes into the unconscious. Decades before Freud came up with anything, so just note that, you guys. It's useful to note. And yeah, it's driving him in directions that you almost get the sense that he can like kind of observe it, but he has no power over it whatsoever.
I wanted to make a quick little side note about the whale jaw specifically. So this particular whale, it mentions twice here that at first it kind of foreshadows the later kind of clarification that Moby Dick has a deformed lower jaw, and that the deformation is kind of like a sickle, or even maybe kind of like one of those completely curved ones, but like the almost like hockey stick shaped ones. And so he has this kind of bent jaw, and that when Ahab's leg is taken off, like we hear in previous chapters that it was like crunched off, but it's described here that it was sliced off. And so, and an interesting thing about that is that sperm whales have really super strong jaw strength. And when they start getting really old, like even though they have teeth, like to your point about them being more aggressive than baleen whales, especially because they do hunt, and sperm whales do sometimes even hunt like orcas and stuff. These whales actually don't need those teeth. So when they get old, most of their teeth are knocked out. So this Moby Dick at this point probably doesn't have any more teeth and has a curved sort of, and their lower jaw is super flat. So if you just have like a bony jaw there, if he just swipes and it's like off center. Like it makes sense with the kind of scenario that's described there, that Ahab approached it with a knife and then it just kind of turned his head, took his leg right off.
Yeah.
Definitely an element of what we would call psychological projection in there, in the descriptor.
Yeah.
I found that really interesting, that Ahab's putting all of his bad habits and bad things onto the whale in some sense within the narration. Again, it's this nested narration. It's so remarkably clever, actually. The way this is written is very interesting, especially with the different types of chapters, right? Because he switches writing styles and perspectives all the time in the chapters. So,
well, if you're going to write a book this long, you should probably keep it varied.
Well, that's one way to do things. So, I also found this interesting. Now, in his heart, Ahab had some glimpse of this, namely, all my means are sane, my motive and my object mad. And it goes on relating to the object, right? And I just went into the etymology, and object is that which is put before you, right? So in some sense, it's fate, right? Like it's outside of your will, right? And the motive is the relationality that you assume, right? So if that which is put before you and the way that you relate to it is mad, right? Like means that are sane, like what are they, right? Like they're completely misguided, right? And you could extract that to modern times, right? It's like, okay, like we find all of these scientific processes, right? Like we have means that are sane, right? But then we don't know how to use them. Like we don't know how to properly relate to them. And that's the motive and the object. Or like Mark went into the knowledge engine on his live stream like last week, and like we go into intuitive knowledge versus concrete or
Particular.
discrete particular. Well, like it's all the same, right? It's left brain, right brain, and it's like, okay, like there's a directionality, a contextualization, like a relationship to the whole, right? In which sanity, right, like sane means can be appropriated, right? But if you don't have proper proper telos, right, to appropriate these means into, then they're going to end up manifesting evil, crazy rituals like that happened in the chapters before.
Yeah, and I think, here's something that's really cool is in Catholic moral theology, the goodness or the badness of the action you're doing is determined almost entirely by the object of your will. So what is it that I'm doing? And that's what tells you if it's good or if it's bad. So once you've got the, let's say, the naming of the deed specified enough, you already know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. So like putting a knife into somebody's chest, well, that's not specific enough. Okay, are you stabbing them or are you performing surgery on them? And then you've got that separated, and then you got to, context also matters with all of those things. But once you've got that specified enough, whether or not you've transgressed is clear. And we can see that the object of his will, just hunting down this whale, is polluting basically everything else that Ahab might do on this voyage, right? So even, him providing for good direction for the crew, keeping them safe out of storms, anything else that he might do on this is going to end up being poisoned by that impure object, basically.
Well, and it doesn't have to be, right? If he kept the highest telos as the highest telos,
And maybe
right,
if they saw the white whale, they'd go after it because they're hunting whales. Yeah.
right, but then he wouldn't corrupt the payment of the orphans and widows, right? Which is that's the higher telos, and he's overridden that, and that became clear, last session there with the ritual, right? How it was this upside down hierarchical thing.
And yeah, like I want to bring in our book club from yesterday because we were talking about leaving the edges of the field for the orphans and the widows, and like I think you have to make that effort, right? Like that's the point. I don't think it actually matters that you leave them, right? Because if there's like like a starvation or whatever, you obviously go to the edges of the field and harvest them, but you have to have them so that you can do them, right? like that will be an option in the future, and when we spread, right, like our harvest to the edges of the field, right, like now we have a totalitarian system, right, and like now there's no place for error anymore, and then error will break whatever we have.
See it's interesting. You kind of see that the madness of Ahab was not necessarily something that put people off immediately. That they figured, oh yeah, okay, like he went nuts because he lost his leg and everything. But there's a paragraph here that says, nor is it so very unlikely that far from distrusting his fitness for another whaling voyage, on account of such dark symptoms, the calculating people of that prudent isle were inclined to harbor the conceit that for those very reasons he was all the better qualified and set on edge for a pursuit so full of rage and wildness as the bloody hunt of whales. But then it says, but the fact that he was only thinking about one whale and not like, oh, now I have a vengeance for all whales like Flask, that he says, these people, they were bent on profitable cruises, the profit to be counted down in dollars from the mint, and he was intent on an audacious and immitigable and supernatural revenge. So it's like they would have actually probably said like, no, just never let this guy back on the boat if they knew it was just one whale that he was angry about.
Well, yeah, it's a common confusion, right? So he breaks down completely and goes into madness, such that he has to be restrained.
Yeah, and he's rocking in the hammock for like months. Yeah.
Right. So he has to be restrained because he's so crazy, and he comes out of that, and that's why they trust him. Which is, if he can survive that, wow. But you're right. The devil's in the details, and the detail here is where the devil is. The detail is now he has an obsession with one whale, and that's back to Father Eric's earlier point about how do you determine if something is good or bad. Oh, the telos. Oh, it's not all whales, right? So it's not good to have him on a ship because he's only going to go after one whale, and that's where the breakdown is. And it's a very subtle difference that most people never see ever in anything. And that's why people are confused about the good and bad. It's not just the formulation. It's also the eyes to see the detail that makes the formulation work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, a lot of times people will flat out say, well, yeah, I know if that politician lies, then I'm not going to vote for them. And then the politician they're voting for is obviously lying. And that's pointed out to them over and over again. So they have the formulation in their head that might be correct, or maybe not, doesn't matter. But they don't follow the formulation because they don't see the transgression that would give the formula, some way of being useful to them.
I wanted to add to, just thinking a little bit, that yesterday we talked about Nebuchadnezzar's dream again, and kind of the statue in his dream, and relating that to kind of like the leaving the edges at the side of the field and everything. Just thinking this thing that, Nebuchadnezzar goes and makes the statue 100% gold when it was supposed to be, kind of tiered and different things. And we just had that chapter a few chapters ago where Ishmael is describing the various different whales and his categorization, but he also mentions the ones that are worth hunting, and even the ones that are kind of the oil is okay, but like we still hunt them because it's still usable for some of this stuff and everything. And it is this case of like, there's a whole bunch of different types of whales that even if they're not that profitable, you still hunt them, and like you're still stockpiling all of that stuff and everything. But like he's completely ignoring all of the other oil, like all of it. And then in many ways, like the top bill hunt is the trophy hunt of Moby Dick, and like you can do that, but that's the gold at the top, and he's just like only that, he just completely cuts everything else off. And I wonder if not having the practice, like the harpooneers maybe not having enough practice of hunting all of the other minor whales is going to have an impact on them being rusty when they actually do end up in that, the legendary hunt.
We will see. We will see. We've got a few chapters between then and now. Don't count them. Don't count them. It's not important.
Okay.
Melville's already counted them for you.
Okay.
So I have another part where they go into identifying something. Human madness is oftentimes a cunning and most feline thing. When you think it fled, it may have but become transfigured into a subtler form. And I think that's important to see, right? Mark was talking about identifying the things that move people, right? And like what it basically says is like, did the madness flee, or did your capacity to keep track of it fail? Right? Because like that's the question. And if you go with scenario 1, then you will be surprised. If you go with scenario 2, right, where we're basically saying, no, there's this thing, and there's no reason, right? Like there is no, how am I going to say this? Like there's no transformation, but there's no ritual that contained the transformation, so that now the lunacy is past, right? Like maybe it was just going ashore, right? But like going ashore is not necessarily a ritual. It could be, right? But it's a adaptation, right? Especially if you've been on sea for a long time, and more especially if you've been on sea in a hammock with your leg just torn off. So it's like you have to adjust, right? And that adjustment like might be transformative, or it might just be a reprieve. And to have that discernment, or at least hold out judgment, right? Because like you don't have to make the discernment, you just have to postpone it until you're capable of identifying what actually happened. And if you presume, right, like we have a lot of presumption in modern times, right? It's like, oh, like that person apologized and therefore they're sorry. It's like, no, like apologizing doesn't make you sorry, right? And like, not that you have to be, but just if you make that presumption, like you'll end up in, well, like discontact with reality, like where we started the chapter.
Yeah. I think of how many times have we heard the story that there's a just man in the community. Everybody looks up to him. He's doing some good work for everybody. And then something really awful comes out about him. He had some kind of a secret double life. He had some kind of a horrible dark addiction, horrible abuse, those sorts of things. And on the outside, you just weren't able to see it at all. Kept that thing hidden in there. But you can imagine with the dark places that some people end up, it's getting pretty close to madness there. And that being hidden away from the world is more common than probably we want to think. But the thing is that if they're hiding it effectively, and that's not impossible, at least for a time, then how do you know? You can't just read people's minds. You can only really read their actions. So
Yeah, well, you can read their spirit sometimes too. But yeah.
sometimes. It's not reliable, though, I don't think.
Right. And most people can't do it. So that's kind of the point.
Alrighty, you guys want to move on to the whiteness of the whale?
Sure.
I think this is a really interesting chapter because old Ishmael here is able to go on for hundreds and hundreds of words just about the color white and what that signifies. And he starts off by talking about, there's all of these places where whiteness will enhance beauty. He talks about different flags, talks about different pieces of architecture, talks about the priest's alb. All of these things come with a very positive and a very beautiful connotation to it. But for him, even though he acknowledges that, and I think most of them are out on land, that especially when he's out at the sea or in the wild, the whiteness is not nearly as comforting as it could be. He talks about polar bears. He talks about white sharks. He talks about albino people. And the one that really got me was talking about how even when everything else seemed fine, if the water around him on the boat was white, that would send not only him, but any sailor into a bit of anxiety, which I guess would mean that there's turbulence around them and it's not calm water. So that makes it good enough sense. And so this whiteness seems to basically signify amplification, as far as I can tell in this chapter, that if something's beautiful already, then you add this quality of shining whiteness to it. It amplifies that beauty. But if something's already got a bit of a threatening aura to it, the whiteness of it only makes that worse. It specifically talks about how white is kind of the everything color, that it and we know this, based on science and all of that white light contains all of the electromagnetic spectrum and the visible part in it. So it has this kind of universal quality to it. So what did you guys think of this one? Because I think this kind of has the key to everything in it, but I'll see what you guys think.
Well, it's definitely high contrast, right? Because he does start out with all the positive aspects of white, and then he delves into all these super negative aspects. So it gives you that high contrast sense for what he's talking about. The other thing is he makes this purely symbolic in a very interesting way, because he links the color directly to the symbol that it's associated with, and then to the goodness or badness, which I find fascinating, because very few people actually bother to do anything like that. But he does also stray. He talks about the White Mountains, which are in New Hampshire, and New England's granite, like everything's granite. And then he talks to Blue Ridge Mountains down in Virginia area, right? I'm familiar with both now, and it's very interesting. The only way to make the White Mountains in New Hampshire white is the snow caps sometimes, which the Blue Ridge Mountains, for example, don't have. So yeah, I mean that's sort of an interesting way of doing the contrasting and exemplifying the symbolism that I found sort of fascinating.
I like that he actually kind of goes explicitly about that. It's the contrast that, in the case of things that are bad, that's the thing that really does make it the most terrifying. Like he says about the polar bear, that it might be said that it only rises from the circumstance that the irresponsible ferociousness of the creature stands invested in the fleece of celestial innocence and love. And hence, by bringing together two such opposite emotions in our minds, the polar bear frightens us with so unnatural a contrast. And I just wanted to make a quick comment about that, like, Ishmael really does like put pen to paper with just the most immodest things sometimes. And I thought like, I won't even say what he says about the albinos, but it topped what he said many chapters back about like men who use hair products not being able to amount to anything. And it's just like, it's such an unnecessary comment that he made. And then now it's just like, he just keeps topping himself. It's like, why are you making these digs on people? Like, just tell the thing,
Don't forget about the white supremacy.
Oh, there was that too, yeah.
Literal white supremacy, which is funny. Like the thing I liked is like, okay, like this is a way to write a book, right? Pretending that you're writing about the whiteness of a whale and then never mentioning the whale. Like, it's like, okay, like this is a way that you can communicate your message. And I think the key to the whiteness, at least from the way that I'm thinking now, is in the end where he's talking about bringing colored glass for snow blindness, right? Like, why do you do that, right? Because the whiteness is overwhelming, right? Like the whiteness includes everything, right? Like it's an overload of colors, right? And therefore, I think it allows itself. Someone needs to be muted. That's Father Eric. There we go.
Yeah.
It's his fan, I guess.
His fan or his freezer behind him or something.
Something really loud. He can't hear it.
Maybe it's static on the wire or something.
Who knows?
So, it is white noise.
Yeah, it was white noise. It was overwhelming.
Yes, and I think I like what is the overwhelmingness of white noise? Well, it's drowning, like literally drowning out all the other things, and so like if the good is embodying the whiteness, right, and drowning out everything else, then that's the rule of goodness, right? Like you could equate that with glory, and we're going again. do you have all the echo cancellations and all those things on?
That's very strange. It was almost different too. Just like,
Yes.
I'll drown you out with white noise.
This was brown noise.
Brown noise.
So, well, like I think you have the white black contrast, right? Where so like that's the obvious, white is abundance and black is the lack of things. I think this one is better. And then you also have the white brown contrast, right? Where white is like the mixture of light and brown is like the mixture of the material, the earthly in some sense, right? And they're mirror images in some aspect.
Is it back?
Yes.
It's just when
it's quieter, which is weird.
You clicked a button and it went back. I was like, "Wow, what happened?" Now
it's not doing it right now. No, it's
strange.
super slight. I can hear it, but it's really quiet. It's fine.
And to go back about contrast, there's no contrast in white. Like
exactly.
Yeah. There would only be contrast in the context.
Right.
Yeah. And that's with the polar bear, right? It's like, okay, like you're contrasting within white context. Like, what?
Right. And whiteness is the lack of contrast, because all the colors can't be discerned, but it contains them all. And so it's a representation of a lack of contrast. Not the only, right? Black is also a lack of contrast in the opposite direction.
But black usually, it almost always has a more negative connotation than white. Yeah, just because it's dark and darkness is scary.
Well, it's an absence. Black is an absence. White is the presence of all color. Black is the absence of all color. So
You also have the idea of the divine darkness, right? Like there's a hidden quality, but there's also a divinity in the hiddenness too.
Right, but that idea is usually, at least in Catholic theology, it's explained as a superabundance of intelligibility.
Right.
Right.
So, like, it's not that God is dark because he's in himself unknowable, but that the only mind that's capable of knowing God is his own, and the rest of us are just not nearly anywhere close to being able to get our minds around it. It's all just too big. So so it's like that divine darkness is kind of a paradox, just because it's the darkness of the sun, and we can't look at it. But yeah, not due to a lack of light there. So what do you guys think of? So we're talking about contrast here, contrasting that very first part of the chapter with the whole rest of it, where we've got light in all of its in refining and beauty and capacity, and white also in its sort of unsettling and terror-inducing capacity. All of that actually is the whiteness of the whale. It's both of those, because I think it is actually both of those.
Yeah, but that's
let me add something to that. So, because I was going to ask, like, this white is projected upon this giant creature, right? Like this giant whale, which is the object of the hunt, right? But it's also swimming in the sea, in the ocean, right? So, like, maybe that's you want to take that with you when you reflect.
Yeah, I think for me, the interesting part about that is that he's representing the whale in two ways at the same time. So there's the majesty about the whale and its uniqueness and its sort of king among kings whale, right? And that also represents its terror at the same time, right? And then what you'll, I think, notice is that all of the positive white attributes that he talks about are the result of like an action or a position or a status. And all of the negative ones, I think, are accidents, like are providential in some sense. In other words, they're not due to a badness inside, right? It's like there's this whiteness of the polar bear, and then he's terrifying for it, right? But it's not the polar bear's fault,
right? There is kind of like I do see a little bit of the sort of thing of like, he's, to your point, some of the examples that he uses of like the positive white things is that he sees like the white stallion on the prairie, and then he also puts it in like a leadership position among a lot of the horses. And so it's like it is kind of this higher thing also even within its own community. And then there's the white albatross, which he had never seen before, and that he's staring in amazement at it for who knows how long, and even describing it in terms like that it's archangelic, so that it's kind of like it's come down onto the boat. And then he even describes that the captain tried to make a postman of it, and then it flew away. And he said, "Oh, no doubt it shook everything off when it flew to heaven." And he has these sort of things. But then you have the case of like, the whale, that there's this whiteness that's emerging from below, and it's just like, okay, that's not, like that's not following the pattern of, oh, the light is supposed to come from above, but it's like here's this kind of light that is shining upwards out of the darkness. And also like it's coming this way. It's like that's not a like it's a welcome surprise when it's the albatross just stopping on the ship.
Yeah, under the positive aspect, it's almost always related to an elevated position in a human hierarchy.
Yeah,
but when it comes to us under the negative aspect, it's a little bit more chaotic. right? Even the waters around the ship being white. That's like, does it get more chaotic than that? It'll bear, yeah.
So I want to connect it back to the last chapter, right, where you have the willness, right, and like that's the materiality, that's the body, and the whiteness is the spirit, like that's described here. Like, what were the qualities of the material, right? One is you can't pin it down, right, in space, right, because you like you it's here, it's there, it's everywhere. Like there's no way to track it, but it's still encountered everywhere and all that stuff. And then the other aspect is you can't capture it. Like you can't pin it down with strength either. Like the imposition upon it is denied. Right? Like even the personal imposition of Ahab jumping out physically at him, having an intimate relationship is failed, right? And then you have this whiteness, this white aspect where it's in some sense it's also the unattainability or something of the white, right? Like it's always beyond. So like this the spirit, right? Like with the size of the spirit, right? Like the reputation that the will has, and then well, the spiritual capture that it can impose upon Ahab, which is interesting that that's more in the material manifestation, right? Like he's captured by a materiality, not so much by the spirit, which is weird. Yeah, and then that connects it to the spirit as a symbol, right? And like I think if we want to place that in the context of a legend, right? Because that's what's happening. Like a legend is building around this creature, and so these two symbols, right, combined into one symbol, they invoke things, right? And then we had this idea of the sailors that knew of Moby Dick, they had an encounter, and then the sailors that were from Europe, right, that don't even know how they would know about it because they're so removed, right? Like they don't even know about the spirit world at all. So, yeah.
I think to your point, there's a paragraph here that I liked a lot that he says, or is it that as in essence, whiteness is not so much a color as the visible absence of color, and at the same time the concrete of all colors? Is it for these reasons that there is such a dumb blankness, full of meaning in a wide landscape of snows, a colorless all color of atheism from which we shrink? And that it's like, I don't know, there's just so much there. But I'm thinking back on the that in the previous chapter, there's a mention that it's almost like, and of course, some of the apparitions of Moby Dick are kind of like, okay, did some of those actually happen? But also, he describes that some of these things, it's like the appearance was at different parts of the planet, and the time frame was not that different. So it's almost like Moby Dick has like shortcuts in the earth or something like that to different parts of the ocean. But that he says that one of the things that was so like sort of cruel in its malevolence, because he gives it like a lot of intelligent agency, that when the sailors would go and they would harpoon it and it would start bleeding profusely, that it would just disappear. And that it always returns back to that whiteness. Like no matter what, you can try to create the contrast on it, no matter how red it gets, it just comes back white again. And that's so there is that kind of like, it restores itself. And then he describes it as like that the sailors started to believe that it was immortal because it's like it didn't matter how much it bled, it would just keep coming back.
So I like actually like this atheism thing that like I was struggling with it, but now I really like it, right? Because like what is the pole? It's a flat world, right? What is the snow? The snow is pure enchantment, right? Like it's a reflection. It's like like it's all of that, but it's unrelatable, right? like it's overwhelming. You can't see the forest through the trees. We had this amazing picture where you have these tree frames on the forest, right? And like if you don't get the proper relationship to the forest, right? Like you can't recognize the forest as a forest, right? You can't see the whole. And I think that aspect is really, really present in, well, the snowy plain, and that connecting that to atheism, right? I think is it's appropriate. Like it's like a different desert, right? Like it's like a dishonest desert. Because there's not really absence, but like it's still absent to you.
All right. Well, I guess I have one parting thought on this and something for you guys just to consider, unless there's more considerations, is that it's impossible for you to separate in the whiteness of Moby Dick the regal aspects from the terrifying aspects, that they both come at once. And no matter which it is you're trying to stab at, the whale itself is one and can only be pursued as one.
Mm-hmm. And that is awesome and awful. In and they're both aspects of awe, right? And like I'm gonna release a video about mystery, because I think awesome, right, is like, well, I was gonna say masculine, but maybe that's not completely appropriate, but at least an intentional relationship to it, right? So if you're hunting this whale, right, like now, even though you can't frame the whale, you still can relate to it, right? Like you can still objectify it in some way, and therefore its awesomeness is contained, right? But like if it jumps at you from the water, that's awful, right? Like now you're subjected to the whale, and it comes over you, and you can't dictate the frame, right? You can't dictate the relationship, right? And that's more feminine, right? Like you're overwhelmed by what you're encountering. And so yes, like those aspects are the same, right? And that's why you have to be careful with doing things that are bigger than you, because you end up
You've
in
got
the
to
wrong
approach him
relationship.
with the proper reverence. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Well, like
Yes.
I was gonna put something a step before, right? Like you gotta be reverent about what you're about to do, if that makes sense, right? Like not even about what you're relating to, but that you're establishing the relationship as such.
Because I bet you, if you were 300 or 400 yards away and a nice speedy boat, and you were just going to behold Moby Dick through a pair of binoculars, you'd probably be fine, right? Because it's what's highlighted most by the other sailors. Anybody who's encountered them is this seeming malice with which Moby Dick would come after you if you tried to harpoon him. But if you kept a safe distance, Moby Dick would probably go along his way.
And that's biting off more than you can chew, literally, right?
Yeah. Yeah. People get themselves into all sorts of trouble over that.
And it's interesting too. I'm thinking just kind of like of sperm whale behavior. So that's one of those things. Like they actually do a lot of times like interact with humans in like a non-lethal way. Like they'll kind of come up and just kind of like check you out and everything. And the way that they communicate, they use these. I think they call them like codas, but they go and it's this type of clicking, but it's so loud underwater that it could actually just completely shatter your eardrums. And if you're right next to it, it would actually shake someone to death. Just by like the sperm whales, like their long distance communication up close, a human being would just be shaken to death by it talking too loud underwater. But they're extremely aware of the like the whales are actually aware enough of how damaging that can actually be. So they like there's some videos out there you can see like divers get up close to some of these whales and they actually lower the voice or like they're clicking just enough to where they can click and get the feel for the shape of the human that's in front of them because their eyes are on the sides and everything. So they'll kind of check them out, but they'll also click to get kind of like the full view. And they actually can get like an X-ray view through echolocation on them, and like the diver can feel the vibration like kind of going through them, and the whale is getting a 3-dimensional view of the person, but it's actually able to modulate its voice in such a way, it can use its inside voice on whatever creature that it's approaching, and still kind of do that. So they're not inherently aggressive, and they even have a lot of like defensive tactics like within families and stuff to defend against orcas. But so I just thought that it was really interesting that it is, he's not aggressive before he gets attacked, but he's also super intelligent and like malicious as soon as he's provoked.
So I want to expand a little on that. I've been watching X films on animals asking humans for help. And this week I got one on sharks. And there was this female diver that the shark came at her and he had like a hook in his mouth. And like she took out the hook with her hand from the mouth of that. And he didn't bite her. And then he ended up bringing all of his friends. And like she showed this box with all of these hooks and she had 300 of them.
Oh my goodness.
And
Took out 300 hooks from the mouths of a bunch of sharks?
Yes.
Holy mackerel.
Nice. If you
So
can
it's like,
share that,
what's
please.
going on there, right? It's like, yeah.
That is cool.
We're the
Please
ones
share
with
that.
these opposable thumbs, makes us useful for.
Yeah.
We put the hooks in there, we can take them out.
Excuse me, mediator, please mediate.
Yeah.
Mediate between what?
Exactly.
Oh my.
Oh, talking about mediation, like the plume of a whale when it sprouts is a pillar. But yeah.
Never mind that natural symbolism.
It has Moby Dick has an unusual plume as well, doesn't he? I think he does.
Is that in here?
It might have been in the previous chapter, but I think there's something about the plume that Moby Dick has from his blowhole that it's larger or like more of a mist or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it is.
Yeah, and I think there's also whiteness in there, right? But yeah, there's several references to that.
Yeah, the smaller the droplets, the more white it will appear, right? So the white in the ocean is related to how much air is in the mixed in with the water. And that also is what makes it dangerous.
Because that would represent turbulence.
Yeah.
But that would also mean like fallen heaven at some level.
Well,
it's
worse. Like one of the theories for some of the missing Bermuda Triangle stuff is related to things like methane pockets, because there's a great deal of methane in a certain semi-solid state under the ocean. When it gets uncovered, it turns into gaseous methane immediately. And I've actually seen the footage. This guy actually ran in a tank a simulation of an oil tanker that goes over bubbles in the water and just sinks immediately. The buoyancy of the water changes. So
it would change
the buoyancy of the water. Right.
That would change the buoyancy, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
So the white
you can't...
water is not just dangerous because of what it represents. It does change. The whiteness in the water means the buoyancy of the water is not what it was, and it's not in the good direction if you want to be sailing on it. That's for sure.
I found the reference as well of the spout. So it was actually right before it was when Ahab was riling everybody up. So it was before today's session, but just a quick little reference of that Dagu was the one that brought it up, and he's like, "Oh, is it that he has a curious spout too, very bushy even for a Parmacetti, and mighty quick. And Ahab confirms that yes, Dagu, his spout is a big one, like a whole shock of wheat, and white as a pile of our Nantucket wool after the great annual sheep shearing.
Oh yeah, I remember that now. Yeah. Okay. So he foreshadowed the whiteness. Such a clever book.
Yeah.
Is it clever or is it just consistent?
Well, yeah, like I was asking that of myself. It's like, how much of this is intentional? Like, it's like, I don't know. Like, it could be. It also could not be. It's like,
If it's just consistent, then you'll come back to the same. I mean, that's how police tell the difference in. They try and discern different testimonies, right? Is how consistent is this? Is there like a central pattern of facts? Is there one person who's a big outlier? All of those things. Other investigators too, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. Melville is really doing that writer thing of just kind of letting the book sort of write itself. But I mean, I remember seeing like an interview. I think it was that Vince Gilligan who did the Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. He actually said, he was like, "Oh yeah, we didn't plan like any of the story. Essentially, we were just doing one episode at a time." And it's just like, really, like you didn't plan it? It's like, no, you didn't plan any of that.
You can't plan a good story. Good stories are never planned.
Yeah.
Ever.
Alrighty, and after those two monster chapters, we got a nice short one here, chapter 43. We've got Archie and Kolo. They're doing some kind of work on the deck, and Kolo, Kaboko. They're doing some kind of work on the deck in the middle of the night, and they hear, and I don't know enough about ships to know exactly where it's come from, but they basically hear somebody sleeping where they shouldn't be. And I don't know where exactly that would be or how exactly they should know, but the one is pretty convinced. Archie's pretty convinced, and Kaboko is Kabako is not convinced at all. And so they just kind of argue about it. This little chapter just seems to be foreshadowing that there's something going on in this ship that has not yet been revealed. So don't know how much time you want to spend on that, but if anybody noticed anything, we could take a look.
Well, just a comment that previously when we had seen Ahab pacing on the deck at like 3 a.m. and everything, that they would say, oh, he'd go into the cargo hold super late at night and nobody knew what he was getting up to in there. And now it says it's the after hold. So like the cargo hold is in the back, right? So he would go all the way back there and nobody knew what he was doing. And now it actually says here that there's someone down there that no one has seen yet. And it's like, who is he visiting at 3 a.m, down there? So that's, I don't know. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah, it's the after hold is actually the the back hold at the back of the ship between the main mast and right. So it's the after the ship already. It's the back of the ship already, and that's the hold that's furthest away. Right. So that's really what we're talking about. So yeah, the implication there is that in fact someone's there, and it is sort of hard to understand that, what that represents, because we're only given this cough and then a bunch of people moving, right? A bunch of the sleepers are stirring somehow, and I'm not sure even how they know that, right? But they seem to sense that the cough has disrupted the sleep of the other shipmates. And the conversation is, don't pay attention to that, pay attention to your work. Right. Just ignore the man behind the curtain, right? We have busy work for you.
Well, like in extension to that, there seems to be a bunch of people in the know and then a bunch of people out of the know, right? And people not wanting to know, but again, talking about reality, right? Like there's two realities there, and for some reason they don't mix, right? Like it's really obvious here. Like I don't want to be exposed, like for real. Like why are we doing that? So and that willful ignorance, right? That's maybe a theme that will come back.
Yeah, it makes me think of how Jordan Peterson always argumentates about, yeah, you have two options: either, the state of the nation and, the entire scientific scenario, or the governmental order is completely screwed up, or those guys are like part rate wackos, like so you can just decide it's easier to live with this one. I don't need to get rid of any fundamental presumptions on the latter. So indeed there is something there to chew on. I realized I just missed the whiteness of the whale by minutes, and I'm very sad about it.
Well, you
Well-
can go back.
If there's something you want to add to it, you go ahead and share that. I'm sure you had some good reason for not starting on time.
Yeah, well, I didn't realize the clock shifted. That's my reason. I guess we're not in summertime anymore. No, I would have loved to hear your thoughts on it. The spectralness about the whiteness of the whale, and how, well, it's a deeply symbolic chapter, right? So I loved how he mentions that it's especially the whiteness of certain, like as if in the countenance of someone when they're in shock, that's where like real horror appears, right? So there's like the element of the strange,
Uncanny.
and the uncanny valley, exactly. Yeah. Just kind of taking possession of someone or a situation, and then that being the thing that kind of puts us a bit loose balance. And how I love how that was juxtaposed to the beginning of the chapter, where he's like talking about all the positive relationships and associations that there is to like the purity of combination of light and all these things, and of whiteness, but how that, well, indeed can lead to horror in the wrong place, in the wrong proportion. I'm most curious, but I think I'll look back on your video when this goes live. So
Okay. Well, everything that you said was in the text, and we talked about it. So you're reading the correct book.
At least you got that part right.
yeah,
Oh my.
Well, the other aspect to Hark here is that Ahab knows something of it. Right? That's the prophecy.
Mhm.
And he calls Ahab Old Mogul. And I imagine that's who he's talking about.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's purely prophetic. Right. So this is just flat out straight prophecy in this context.
Mhm.
I don't think Ahab's above false imprisonment. I think.
No, he's one of the good guys.
Oh yeah,
or the five guys, right? That came aboard. Is it five?
I think it was 3, but
Or maybe it's 3.
but they weren't seen. So, and Ishmael never checked the aft hold. So,
Mm-hmm.
And if he did, would he have done a good job?
no.
Our unreliable narrator is not to be trusted with checking things. And he
Unreliable
tells you that.
everything. Yeah.
He tells you that too. Don't give me this job. I suck.
Yeah.
Okay, dude.
He
Sure.
stands on the mast of the story and doesn't pay attention.
There you go.
Oh my. All right, chapter 44, the chart. So it's really interesting. This starts off with making sure that you remember what happened 4 chapters ago, the squall that took place the night succeeding that wild ratification of his purpose. And Ahab has meticulously gone through every account of whale sightings that he can get a hold of, and all of this, and is trying to basically create a, I think they're called the heat map, right, of probabilities of where he could find Moby Dick, because finding whales out there in the Pacific Ocean is hard enough. Finding a particular whale is a ridiculous prospect. But he's managed to collect enough information about it and to discern that information, right, based on everything he could get his hands on, to create a place where at this time of year, if we go cruising there, we've got a chance of encountering him. And they are the impression we get is that this is a really difficult task, but Ahab's probably doing about as well as any human being could under the circumstances. But it's another manifestation of this obsession and madness that's absolutely eating him up. So we've got the whole meme of the guy with the chart behind him and all of the different strings connecting everything together. You get a little bit of that there, but instead of being funny, it's kind of scary and it's kind of sad when it's described this way. And it also explicitly mentions that leaving Christmas Day, they probably are not going to be able to hit that place at the right time for at least a year. So Ahab's going to have to do some regular whale cruising in the meantime, just because they won't be able to get to that place in the heat map on the day and on the time that he had calculated at it. The season on the line. So, this chart, he seems to be trying to nail down Jello molds with this.
Well, from what I remember, there's a few things going on here. One is he kind of indicates that other captains use these particular tactics, to find the whales. Very scientific sounding, like tracing the food source and sightings and various different methods. But he sort of implies that Ahab has a better method. He's got something else. The other theme that's in here very clearly is all these scientific methods, A, don't work and B, don't account, right? So it's like they sort of work, but actually, there's a lot left out. But also sometimes they completely fail, and also they don't account for certain sightings. So it can't be right in some sense. Not that it's useless. It can't be the thing. And that, you very much get this, if you want to phrase it this way, this anti-scientific approach flavor from the chapter, and also this almost preternatural ability of Ahab to do something the other captains can't do. And it's not clear, at least to me, whether or not that's that is only due to the amount of time he's spending with the charts that he has and the number of those charts and things like that. It seems like there's an unseen hand guiding him or something. That was the impression that I got from the chapter anyway.
I definitely got the that there is this sort of thing of that he is, he's got the whole elaborate plan, and that it says, that the premature hour of Pequod sailing was perhaps correctly selected by Ahab with a view to this very complexion of things. And that he also acknowledges that it's sort of a miscellaneous hunt, just kind of buying time for the next year, because, of course, as you say, it wouldn't be possible for him to get to the place where he actually wants to be for the official hunt location at the time that he left. But at least there's some time to prepare, and it just so happens that the place that he's chosen as the prime area to look for Moby Dick is also where his tragic loss of his leg and destruction of the ship and everything like that happened. So it is this sort of thing of, oh, he's doing all the science, he's doing all the planning and everything, but really it's kind of just spending the next year stewing before the showdown at the place where it all kind of kicked off.
Is there a sense for when Ahab lost? Is this his next voyage?
Yeah.
After
Yes.
the leg loss? It is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, boy, we'll see how it works out for him.
So it was like it's a span of 3 years then. So it was the previous around Christmas that he lost his leg, and then he comes back, and then it's that following Christmas he departs, and he's not expecting to fight it until the following December or January.
Oh, okay. So he's at least made plans to fulfill the mission of the ship to some extent.
So I haven't read the whole thing because, well, the time. But the impression that I got from the start is that it's like there's a material manifestation of the spirit of the whale that's preceding the whale, right? So to go back to the prophecy, right? Like there's a prophecy of the whale, right? And then there's two entities connecting to the prophecy, right? Like the whale itself, guided by a deity, effectively, and the human entity guided by science, right? And it's interesting that there's this the scientific materializing of the spirit of the manifestation, and well, how that's also under the water, like there's also something there, right? But yeah, like that's for me a really interesting visualization, right? Like this coming together, building the path that is going to be followed by the whale, and then the anticipation of the ship, right? Because like the ship can't relate to where the thing is coming together for the wheel now as to relate to where it's going to come together for the wheel in the future, and that the wheel is also going to like proceed to that point by that spirit, right? Because like if you don't make the connection from, okay, like if there's a random emergence of food in the center of the ocean, there's going to be no wheels because there's no path to it, right? So like you have to make that connection to the position of the wheel going to the place that you're going.
And I think this just chapter kind of contrasts interestingly with the previous two chapters, kind of along the previous three chapters. We're given all of this setup and this anticipation for the whale to be this super preternatural force, uncontainable, mysterious in his ways. And the way Ahab goes about checking him is a very mathematical. There's a very procedural kind of way to try and nail him down with the best that the human mind could come up with. And it seems with the technology he has and the means at his disposal, it seems a little arrogant to try it, to try and tame this force of nature just with his charts and his own indomitable will. And I'm not sure, even with all of our fancy GPS tagging and all of that we would do much better. We could maybe, I don't know. I don't study whales. I'm sure somebody does, but to find this whale in the ocean, like this particular whale, unless you've got like a tag on him that's going to broadcast a radio frequency, I don't know. And even then, that tag could just come off. So
it wouldn't work.
Yeah,
it would malfunction mysteriously.
somehow.
You can tell.
Yeah.
And so like that.
Go ahead, Manuel.
But that reminds me of the story of Job and the wheel there, right? Like, can you capture it within your nets, right? Like that's the constraint, right? Like the trying to have the mystery contained, and then the piercing of the scales, right? Like the the pointy thing, the dissection, right? The ability to know the thing beyond what it shows itself to you.
Yeah, and the focus on how that process of the pointing and the technocratic approach, how it's completely tormenting to the soul. They talk about how he sleeps with the clenched fists and leaves bloody hands, of how perturbed his inner workings are due to this obsession, right? That it's completely breaking him. Because he's like, well, I think it is very much akin to saying that he is participating in something that is beyond him, but he's forcing himself through it. And in the no, that's a naughty thing to do. You're not supposed to go against the grain of like existence so boldly, right? It's like the echo of, hey, you're going the wrong direction, and it's going to torment you, and it's going to be its own. The sin is going to be its own punishment in a way.
It reminds me of how Chesterton said in Orthodoxy that, poets don't typically go mad, but chess players do.
Hmm.
And yeah,
That's great.
and there's he has this image of like the poet will just kind of float on the ocean, will just kind of float on the waves, while the mathematician and the chess player will try and get the ocean into their head. And if they're not careful, their head's going to split long before the ocean gets in there.
Yeah.
So I wanted to point out, just to kind of add on what you guys had kind of said, that in the sentence and a half before what Diego brought up about him, sleeping and waking up with bloody hands because his nails are just digging into his palms, that it says that he refers to Moby Dick and says, his broad fins are bored and scalloped out like a lost sheep's ear. So that is kind of to the point of he's not taggable, and that every time you try to tag him, that it just goes through and leaves a hole, and that it says, and here his mad mind would run on in a breathless race till a weariness and faintness of pondering came over him, and in the open air of the deck he would seek to recover his strength. Ah, God, what trances of torments does that man endure who is consumed with one unachieved revengeful desire? And it says that his hands are completely all messed up, in the morning. And then in the next page, it says, a wild cry would be heard through the ship, and with glaring eyes, Ahab would burst from his stateroom as though escaping from a bed that was on fire. So it really is that he's just so riled up and just unable to. There's that thing of that not only is the whale not taggable, and you can't actually like grasp at it, like it really is like a phantom, but also that he dreams of grasping at it, and he just winds up digging his nails into his own hands, like he's grabbing himself when he tries to grab it.
Yeah. So I'm watching this Chinese show, and like I don't know, like that has so many connections for me. It's crazy. But one of them is this wise guy, this drunkish wise guy. He's with this basically autistic general who only cares about war, and he's like, no, you have to deal with politics, right? Like you can't just do this because your king is going to interpret it this way, blah blah blah, right? And at the start he's sensible, right? And at a certain point he gets into this fight, and the guy is like, no, like he's not, I'm not going to betray him, right? Because that's basically what it ends up at, right? Like, okay, now you're stuck in the situation in trust, and you're not going to be able to rely on this guy, so you're going to have to betray him. Like, that's the consequence. And they get into this interaction, and then the guy says, I don't know if you're mad or I'm mad. And then he ends up killing himself because he was wrong, basically. And like that's what you do, right? Like if you start anticipating, right, that which cannot be captured or should not be captured, you end up in this game. Like you're trying to grasp something, and you're gonna pervert reality, right? Like, and this, the problem is that you can do that to a certain degree, right? Like you can manipulate reality to shape it. But if you shape it too much, it will snap. And and you have to stay true, and in the staying true you have to make sacrifices, and you have to be vulnerable, right? Because that's basically the thing that the guy was not willing to do, right? He wasn't willing to take a vulnerable position because he wanted to anticipate and have control of the relationship, right? So when we're captured by this wanting to know, right, we end up self-referential, like Castle said. Like, and I like the grasping yourself and paining yourself or injuring yourself in the self-clasping as an image of that, right? But yeah, like this guy also ended up dead because like there's an end to that road.
You know, you made me think the torment part and the pain infliction. It makes me think of in the Confessions, Saint Augustine. When he talks about time, he mentions that he describes time as a as an awkward distension, like you're trying to reach for something and not quite, like you have to kind of awkwardly get to it and you're suffering and like your muscles are not quite reaching there and you're like awkwardly carrying a weight in a moment that is like, he describes time as that experience, and like the mortal, the base things of this earth are we go through that in that human tempo, we suffer. And he describes going back to the spirit or the one or just right worship as the refuge where you can go back and participate with the infinite, and that prevents you from the infinite distension that is uncomfortable, that is awkward, that is suffering, that is tortured. And here it's not, it's like, it makes me think again that this is what we're seeing here is partly Ahab is participating in his own earthly abilities, but not only that, but he's doing that to attune to a wrong spirit, like a spirit that is not aiming upwards. So the suffering is twofold. Is that he's like stuck on his necrophagic ways, but also he's like aiming at the wrong thing for the wrong reasons even. So yeah.
Yeah, and I want to add to that in our book club yesterday, stumbling stone, right? The stumbling stone is that which calls you to reorient, right? And it's a call, right? It asks something of you, and it is also a test at the same time, right? And it's also a reinitiation or a reconfiguration of the telos, right, in the call, and what that's the thing that will transform you, right? And like you can use this time as extending yourself, right? So the stumbling stone is a point, and from that point you can extend yourself, but you can extend yourself rightly and you can extend yourself wrongly, right? Like if you can overextend, right, then you stretch beyond your capabilities, or you can adhere as is your portion. And yes, and then it's important, right? Like, okay, so like you stumble, right? Like you enter in this relationship with this will, right? So you're stumbled over the stone. Like, what does that mean? Right? Because that's the thing that we haven't decided yet, at least at that point. And that was even true for Ahab, right? Like he did not harbor that vengeance at the start, right? So we fill that in over time. Like, what is the meaning of that which occurred, right? And the meaning of that for Ahab is that he needs to defeat the will, right? But he doesn't need to defeat the physical will. He needs to defeat the hold that the will has on him, right? And so to go back to the extension, right? It's like, okay, like does the stumbling stone draw you out into somewhere, or does it require of you the humility and the acceptance that that stone did something to you, and that you might not be able to meet that challenge because it's not by your own might?
Yeah, and I think there'll be a few things, later on in the book that'll help answer that question. But we'll wait till we get there. But yeah, we do see Ahab in a very sorry state, where he's in the hold of something that he can't control, and he's incapable of letting it go. And that's, I think people get themselves in all sorts of trouble by being incapable of letting things go. Anger or grief or vengeance, all these sorts of things are things that'll grab hold of people, and it can cause quite a bit of mischief. So
like the like you really see the struggle in like that last paragraph of this chapter, of just the sheer amount of, and this, I was actually wrong previously when I thought it was the other chapter, but it was here that it says, that he had given up all of his thoughts and fancies to the one purpose, and it says that purpose, it says, forced itself against gods and devils into a kind of self-assumed independent being. And that it says that when Ahab would rush out of his room, that for the time, the tormented spirit that glared out of his bodily eyes was, for the time, a vacated thing, a formless, somnambulistic being, a ray of living light, to be sure. We're seeing kind of like a callback to the whiteness thing, but without an object to color, therefore a blankness in itself. And I'm seeing kind of a parallel there with like the paragraph about sort of the simultaneously full of meaning but also completely blank, like atheistic whiteness, kind of coming out there, and that he's kind of turned himself into a type of Prometheus, and that the vulture that's feeding on his heart is also, he made the vulture.
Yeah, and I want to go back to Ahab meeting Moby Dick a little bit, because like I see the analogy with Peter stepping on water, going to Christ, right? Because like what he did jumping at the wheel, like that's like an ultimate act of faith. Like I don't, it's like, what is that? and he got betrayed by his fate, right? Like that's like real intense. Like that's world shattering level stuff.
Well, sure, but when Peter walked out on the water, he wasn't going to kill Christ.
Right.
No, I know, but like Christ did not betray Peter, right? Like
Peter betrayed himself.
Right.
Yeah.
But Ahab got betrayed by what?
By Ahab.
By his
by
Christ,
jumping at a whale with a pocket knife. Ahab got betrayed by Ahab.
Well, whatever spirit he was worshiping at that point.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that's important, right? Like something got shattered that is beyond his leg, and that Moby Dick stepped into that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I wanted to make a quick comment that you had mentioned something about this being a sort of lead up from the previous chapters, and I did notice that pattern, that we switch writing styles. I looked at like a couple of sentences in the next chapter. The writing style changes again, but that we had the same sort of thing, that in the previous session there were 4 chapters of a play, and that it was like 3 setups and then a finale, and then we're also experiencing exactly that same pattern, but with a different type of writing style with this one, with this being the finale.
Patterns within patterns.
And in some sense, right? Like it's the 3 frames. We have the head, the chest, and then the body, effectively, right? Or well, the one that we use is you and yourself, you and others, and you and the world, right? And like there's these trees that allow you to come at something from multiple sides, and then at the end you can bind them together into a whole.
We discussed a little bit on Friday, actually, on Mark's stream. There was this sort of thing about like the truth, the good, and the beautiful, and that it's necessary to have them all at once as the unity. And that, because if you make a mistake, like, and I had kind of talked about that in my own experience, that you choose one, and that a whole bunch of stuff winds up falling apart. But that you are kind of seeing this thing of that you're getting the three elements, and then you do get everything kind of piled in all at once, and then you get like the full visibility there in the way that he's written at least these last two blocks of 4 that we've gotten.
And so, I want to contrast this with Peterson's framing, right? Because he says you have the positive masculine, the negative masculine, the positive feminine, and negative feminine. I don't know if it's masculine, feminine that he uses, or the chaos, whatever. Like, it's the same difference. And when you have trees, you get a different dynamic than when you have fours, right? Like, because fours is trying to have a completeness, right? While tree is trying to fulfill something or something, right? Like it's trying to give flesh more so than dissect, I guess.
It's funny how numbers work.
Yeah.
Oh my. Well, I'm satisfied with the discussion we've had today. Once again, very enlightening. Do we got any final words or parting shots?
Well, just there's one sentence near the end of 44 here where it says Ahab's case, yielding up all his thoughts and fancies to his one supreme purpose, that purpose by its own sheer inveteracy, such good prose, of will, forced itself against gods and devils into a kind of self-assumed independent being of its own. Right. And so there's an explicit invocation of a spirit that happens as the result of a will turned towards a specific telos. Right. Which is this, he says it a few sentences before, Ahab, the scheming, unappeasedly steadfast hunter of the white whale. This Ahab had gone to his hammock and was not the agent that so caused him to burst from it in horror again. That's right. So Ahab goes somewhere to his hammock and he bursts from the hammock, but he's not doing the bursting. Something. So right at the end here, basically, we started this sequence with Moby Dick, right? And this is called the chart, and it's almost as if the chart is the medium for the driving of Ahab. Ahab's not being driven by Ahab or Ahab's will or Ahab's quest for vengeance. That's all being funneled through this chart. And that's what I think he's kind of representing. The chapter titles are very, very interesting. Right. I mean, Hark calls your attention. Right. And yet and that chapter is all about the tension of attention. Pay attention to your work. Don't worry about the unseen things below that you have a good reason to believe are there. Mind the bucket. Right. And you have this, again, the first formal description of white whale. And then you've got this chapter called the chart. And all the chart is talking about is not the chart. It's talking about Ahab. Right. So it's not even about the chart. There are charts in it, right? Or there is a chart that keeps getting revised as though it's alive and it's changing all the time. But it's not really about the chart per se. It's really about Ahab and his possession. and how that plays out.
And I want to point at the word burst, because bursting is unable to contain, right? And so the uncontainability of Moby Dick is now transferred to the inside of Ahab.
Oh, snap. I thought
Mm.
Ahab hated Moby Dick. Why would he allow himself to be recreated in that image?
Dun dun dun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the very last sentence, right? He's basically entreating God to help Ahab, out of his problem, effectively, right? Because he's trapped like Prometheus, right? To I mean, the very creature he creates, right? And so he's stuck in that cycle.
A
And Ishmael
vicious cycle.
recognizes that and
vicious
tries to
cycle.
get him out of it. Yeah.
Reciprocal narrowing, if we were going to put it into fancy Vervaeke words.
Exactly. And sometimes we do. So fair enough.
So Prometheus stole the fire, right? What is Ahab doing with his maps? Divination. Like, it's the revealing of the things that should be done by gods.
All
Yeah,
right.
and there's explicit mentions of the separation of the head and the spirit. So then that's what divination is when there's no proper mediation.
Right.
All righty. Well, I think I'm going to properly mediate the spirit that's calling me to end this live stream. Not because it's bad, but because it's good. And we don't want to spoil it by going on too long. So, gentlemen, once again, thank you for your contributions. I look forward to this every week. I hope everybody who watches, either whether recording or live, does so as well. And I'll post next week's reading soon enough. But God bless you all.
God bless.
Thank you.
Ciao.